Hello, Internet. This is Midgardia Chats, and I'm Garnbreak1. Today we're here to talk about Cyberpunk. And with me I have fellow Midgardia D&D player, Fury.
Hi, I'm Fury. I'm allowed to make exactly one transhumanism joke, and I'm really excited.
And I have Mocast from the Smite Club days.
Hi, yeah, MoCas. I'm not limited to these jokes, so prepare yourself.
And I also have Nox Populi, who is the Internet Crypto Dude.
Hi. I'm hoping not to make any jokes.
100% serious.
Yeah, that's gonna happen.
I'll see if I stick to it. But
Yo. Alright,
So, Nox.
So
what
Nox,
do you
tell
call...
me about the blockchain.
oh, fuck off. Actually, fuck off.
Alright. So, the first question, let's just start with the most obvious one. What the fuck is cyberpunk? Is it an aesthetic, a philosophy, or both? Or neither?
It's a genre. It's a genre which has a lot of associated philosophies and themes. I think the biggest ones that come to mind are, late capitalism and and dehumanization through technology and whatever the hell else. But it's a genre with an associated aesthetic, which I think is pretty fucking cool. But
And it's sort of an interesting thing that a lot of the philosophy and a lot of the aesthetics of the genre really didn't show up for the first while. Like, people were writing cyberpunk for a while before we really got into those, and now it's considered so attached, right? Like, it's hard to now disconnect the genre from the aesthetics and the philosophy.
yeah, no, totally. And I think a lot of people have also gotten sort of lost in that. Like, you have cyberpunk stuff that, God, I'm blanking on a name, but I know it exists. Sorry. Where you have cyberpunk stuff where you have the aesthetic, but it's, either a worship of or completely uncritical of, for example, corporate capitalism, big data overreach, stuff like that.
There's this whole thing of like cyberpunk from the other side, which is, I think, only probably in the last 10 or 15 years come about, which is like cyberpunk, but the perspective of the big corporations as opposed to of the punk part, the resistance, right? And that's sort of a strange thing that's come out of it.
Yeah, really, no kidding. Also, Mocas, I thought I heard you saying something.
Yeah, no, my brain died there. No, keep going.
Alright, so like Deus Ex Human Revolution. That kind of thing?
Yeah, that's exactly. That's a corporate-sided thing. It doesn't.
Well,
Yeah, you can like see the cyberpunk in it, but it's like it's almost like it's the antagonist in it in a lot of cases and stuff like that. And like, it's quite interesting that it's got all the aesthetics, it's got even some of the philosophy, but it's missing one of the biggest parts of the genre.
It's missing the key part of the genre, like classic
it's missing half the word.
Yeah, a cyberpunk, like, if for anyone here who's played Human Revolution, you walk out of your gigantic, corporate tower and pass through the streets of Detroit, past a bunch of kids waving their hands over oil drum fire pits, and like in most cyberpunk, that is where the protagonist is. The protagonist is more in common with that kid than with the leather jacket wearing cyborg with the state of the art weapon system embedded in his skin.
Which is almost too bad, because I appreciate the like Human Revolution aesthetic as well. It's just I kind of wish we'd ever developed a different name for that instead of just grouping it into cyberpunk.
The issue you have there is that it is still cyberpunk, and you have to. The point of Human Revolution was that whatever, I can't remember what they call the cyborgs in that setting. I think it's just transhuman or something like that.
Just call it cyborgs.
Yeah, basically the cyborgs in that setting were the outcasts of society, and you were playing as the outcast of society there.
It's true, they did have the whole like anti-augmentation angle, so even though you were corporate, you were still almost the underdog societally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they didn't explore that, really. They mentioned it, but I didn't feel like that was a major theme of the game. Admittedly, I wasn't able to finish it because I broke up with the ex who was giving me the game, so it's not like I could finish it.
Even Adam Jensen himself, the way that he got his augmentation was entirely forced on him because he didn't read a contract carefully enough, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
To be fair, I'd still sign that contract.
Oh
I'd
yeah,
sign the contract. Like, yeah.
but there's a difference.
No.
There's a difference between knowing you're gonna get dope cybernetics when you get blown up, and like not knowing and waking up and seeing you've been enhanced to shit.
Mm-hmm.
But he was still the victim in that story. His girlfriend or whatever her name is, I can't. Susan, I don't know. But anyway, his girlfriend in that story literally like took a chunk of his genetics to make, was it Prosium or Proxine or something like that? To make the drug that made cybernetics available to the public. He was exploited by the corporate machine there, and he was dealing with the consequences of it.
but it wasn't explored. I guess it and again, that's after the point where I got dumped. But I don't know. I never felt like we discussed this, like the level of saw it there, but we didn't.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with you there. Like it was handled. I'd almost call it cyberpunk light. You get all the nice little taste of it, but you're not getting the sugar behind it, and you just kind of empty. Despite
It sort of like nods to the tropes without ever actually getting there, right? It's like, yeah, it's just you're missing the really meat of him reacting to what's happened to him.
It's the difference between eating a pre-processed gas station cupcake and having made one the entire damn day.
Okay.
No,
it's
yeah, I agree. With
it's meant to evoke this homegrown imagery, but it co-opts and doesn't fully use it. I don't know.
Well,
it's kind of interesting that the Human Revolution style is almost becoming now more common. Like, I feel like we have more content in that sort of on the side of cyberpunk than actual cyberpunk content.
You can actually look at if you go and look at all the novels, the comic books, video games, and whatnot, you tend to see that trend coming out of around 2003.
Yeah.
You start seeing the trend towards corporate cyberpunk or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I feel, is just a natural evolution of the genre. You're coming from, all right, we've looked at one side of the story, and now let's see, what else can we talk about within this setting? Like, what other ideas are there? And now you have to say, well, let's look at the bad guys, or quote unquote bad guys idea.
A lot of it is also, I think, authors not wanting to contest with like the fact that there's been so many greats in cyberpunk, like writing. Like, no one wants to pick up a cyberpunk project, whether it's a book or a game or something like that, and be like, yeah, you know what, I could do Gibson better. Right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, only Gibson can do Gibson, but
so like they almost, it feels like taking it a step to the other side and covering something that isn't that angle is sort of freeing in that you don't feel like you're contesting with the great names in the genre.
I mean, I think there's also something to be said here, and this is where you just got to deal with my leftist flag. You got to deal with the fact that like media is in many ways owned by corporations, and it doesn't serve them to foment anti-corporate sentiment, which is the core of, I guess you'd call it, classical cyberpunk.
And you get that a lot, especially like in Deus Ex. Deus Ex is owned by Ubisoft, and that's a giant conglomerate of video game companies.
Yeah, so no way they're going to take the time to say like, hey, giant conglomerates of companies selling products for your enjoyment directly into your brain are evil.
That's a really interesting point, actually. Sorry for cutting you off, Nox. I'll get back to you in a sec. But books are also one of the cheapest mediums to produce, right?
Yeah, basically.
Compared to AAA,
games, especially.
Yeah, which would explain why anti-capitalist sentiment is a lot more expressed in the cheap medium for plebs as opposed to the $300 million AAA titles.
Exactly.
What I was going to say is Ubisoft's a strange one, because aren't they also Assassin's Creed, where like the primary villains is a corporation?
And Watch Dogs.
Yeah, Watch Dogs 2, where it's effectively a cyberpunk story, except it's actually contemporary fiction, because we're there.
Yeah.
Before I get into that topic, though, What about Ghost in the Shell? It seems like that has a lot of the same, like, it focuses on the powers that be and the servants of them as Deus Ex Human Revolution, but it doesn't get the same flack for missing the point.
I
That-
mean, God, I love Ghost. Sorry, I interrupted.
I would not put Ghost in the Shell in the cyberpunk genre. It is more a thriller spy type novel or like show graphic novel, whatnot.
Let's not talk about the film.
The film doesn't exist
What
unless
film?
you're talking about 95, Innocence, and like I don't get into Arise. Let's not look at Arise.
It's
Mocas,
certainly.
I'm a little in love with you right now.
Oh my god, you should see my tattoos.
It's getting kind of into that, and I feel like this is a thing with Gibson as well recently, of how you start having to make the differentiation between cyberpunk and like near future speculative fiction because of how many of the cyberpunk themes just have to now exist in near future speculative fiction because, like Garm said, we've got there. And Ghost in the Shell feels like the perfect example of that, of all of the aesthetics might be cyberpunk, but really the story is more of a speculative fiction thing.
Well, I mean, I think if anything, the fact that we're moving toward a cyberpunk surveillance state future is evidence of just how right the original sentiment of the genre was.
So ultimately, when I'm looking at Ghost in the Shell, I'm not viewing it in the same view that I would, let's say, like Neuromancer or even like some parts of the Matrix. To me, it is primarily like not a great mystery, but it's like it doesn't have the noir like genre stuff that you typically get out of some cyberpunk.
So it's closer to transhumanist fiction than cyberpunk fiction specifically.
Yeah, that's
That's
fair.
exactly what it is.
That's a good word for it, yeah.
Alright. So I guess my next question is, what isn't cyberpunk? Like, where's the line where something stops being cyberpunk fiction?
I
And
mean,
if
that's a little bit what we were just getting into as well.
First there we have to define exactly
Yeah.
what cyberpunk is, which is going to actually be different for everyone.
I mean, I feel like at the end of the day, punk fiction is always going to be this, rebellion against establishment, rejection of norms, and I think that's where we have to start with cyberpunk.
Mm-hmm. It's the outsiders of society, those who feel they aren't included by something, resisting a movement that they don't agree with, is going to be all of punk fiction. And when you get into cyberpunk, that's specifically the big technology corporations controlling society is what they're resisting against, right?
Yeah, I think it's also interesting. Sorry, I just thought about this, that cyberpunk now is going the way steampunk did, where steampunk had a lot of fertile punk ground in subverting Elizabethan era imperialism, and instead just like, ooh, shiny gears.
Yeah, now it's just an aesthetic. No steampunk I've ever talked to can tell me even a single piece of writing from steampunk, right? Like, it's not what anyone into the aesthetic really looks at anymore.
Which is a shame, because the difference engine is fucking fantastic.
Oh my god, right?
It's really interesting that steampunk's gone that way and cyberpunk has never really quite been able to. Like, we're certainly at a point where the aesthetic is a thing on its own, but I think it's partially due to the fact of how much of it was right, how much of it did become our actual experience, that we can't ever quite get the aesthetic entirely away from the source, which is nice, I think.
The thing is with that, it's also the source. We're ultimately like, this goes back to we're kind of living it right now.
Yeah, we're closer to the source of that than the steampunks are to their source, right?
So
because
you can't help but be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is the communities that kind of built around that cyberpunk aesthetic, like Lane Chan. they tend to be like, you go there because you specifically want to talk about it, and it's not really a popular thing. Like, you don't see too much. Like, if you go to a convention or something, you're not going to see much tech wear compared to like steampunk stuff. So you have to, like, for like pop culture and whatnot, like, you just don't get that what's the word for it, exposure.
It's almost more. It's interesting to me that Cyberpunk isn't more popular given how accurate it ended up being.
Well, I mean, part of it is that aesthetic. Like, when you go outside, you kind of just see it, and it's almost normal.
Mm-hmm.
So that normalcy hides it, but that that hiding it is also it's keeping it more or less intact in its current state.
I think there's also something to be said for it's coming true at the societal level too, meaning that people are also being like, one of the major things about Cyberpunk is people being, I guess, suckered into into corporate ideology, into corporatized entertainment media, into just buying into the system rather than resisting it, and we have people buying into the system rather than reading fiction that questions it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, there's this massive group of people, especially nowadays, where if it's not a AAA game, if it's not a big Hollywood movie, they're never going to seek it out. Like, you have this whole, if it isn't the most corporate type of media, some people will not interact with it, which
Exactly.
is an interesting dynamic to things like YouTube and Twitch, where the people who are going to that for content are often like, if only 200 other people have ever seen this, it's fantastic to me, as opposed to, being a downside. So we've kind of polarized into the people who go for the big corporate stuff and the people who are looking for the really indie stuff. Like, I don't want to say hipster because that's kind of like a music thing, but like I know people who look for the smallest but highest quality channels on YouTube, thinking that it's going to be, once it hits 1 million subscribers, they probably aren't going to be that interesting anymore because they'll sell out and stuff like that. Is an attitude that exists now.
They're not wrong.
It's kind of polarized to the people who have really fallen into the, I guess, trap that where Cyberpunk is worried about, of really buying full into the big corporate media.
Then what do you think about the Patreon stuff that has popped up? Like, we have small creators that are getting a small income from that. Like, is that...
This is actually a big deal topic to me because I've been on the fence for about 2 years now about starting a Patreon.
But
what
yeah,
I like about Patreon is it is an attempt to recreate something that goes way further back than actual Cyberpunk. We're going all the way back to like Victorian and pre-era, where as an artist you could have a noble patron who just paid your living wage, so all you could do is create your art. And we see the kind of art that comes out of that, out of the like great masters of painting, out of the like classical era with Bach and Mozart and stuff like that. Like, we've seen that style of just give an artist an amount of money to be able to live and watch what they create actually can create really amazing things. And then we have the total opposite, which is both seen now with Patreon and historically. There's in the like communist bloc era, there's the joke about the Georgian poets, right? Where they would write maybe a thing a year because they knew, as with their official job as poet, they would make as much as someone who actually worked the rest of the year, and then they would just fuck around. And you have a bit of that on Patreon as well, of just like, there is the worry that someone is going to get really popular with something and then get the Patreon money starting to come in and then just feel like they don't have to work as much anymore. They will once in a while put something out to keep those few people interested and just get the money. And like, that polarization of how that's used is sort of my struggle with it. Is I really adore the idea of letting artists just create and not have to worry about a day job and things like that. Like, I really appreciate that. I also know how people are going to abuse it.
Well, I mean, sure, but it doesn't. I guess I just don't think it's an indictment of the system itself. You know, like this idea of people getting, getting patrons, getting people to support them while they just make art is a great thing. And sure, some people are going to make less art as a result of that, and either their patrons will leave them or they won't. And if people feel like they're getting their money's worth out of it, and people are, able to eat while still doing what they love, then really, what's the problem?
And like that's the dream, right? Like, that's the dream in any system, is if you can do what you love, other people appreciate you doing what you love, and you can eat while doing it. Like, that's sort of the goal, really, for me, for any system, is just being able to pursue the things you love will allow you to live. The major complaint I have actually heard from Cyberpunk circles on Patreon is all it does is take the bottom however percent of wealth and redistribute it around, as opposed to approaching the actual problem of, like, no one in the top 5% of like wealth is donating to a Patreon, right?
Yeah,
like,
well,
it's all
totally.
the artists supporting each other, or like the like the lower level that is. And that's kind of one of the issues with it, is the old school patron style. It was the few with money allowing artists to live, and now it's just artists and fans trying to support each other at the lower, like, 50% of incomes, which isn't the ideal yet.
Well, sure, but it's something, and it lets artists eat. It's a material benefit, whether or not it's the ideal solution.
Absolutely.
And we could talk about wealth redistribution, sure, but what matters more is that people can eat.
Ideally, people can eat the rich. We're working on it.
You can't. You just get trouble.
You just might go to jail for it.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
Also, in jail, you get free food, so yeah, win-win.
Win-win. Winner, winner.
Don't even.
Too late. It's already happened.
So I think the overall question here was where to draw the line of what wasn't Cyberpunk, right? Like, that's what we strayed from here.
Yeah, that's where we started going. Should we leave in that discussion or come back to it later?
That's absolutely fine. Yeah.
That's
okay,
fine.
Awesome.
I just think we should also maybe try addressing the question.
Leave back to the topic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just look like a lunatic shouting random things.
Yeah, no, that's actually a great idea.
I mean,
But
we did talk
you
about
are
it.
a lunatic shouting random things. You always have been.
That is true. We already talked a bit about the corporate perspective being where we start to sort of draw the line for what Cyberpunk is, and I think Fury was putting it best at that when it's no longer from the perspective of those resisting or those outside of the societal norms, that's sort of where we start getting fuzzy on whether it is still Cyberpunk. Like, the cyber part is fantastic. Like, again, Human Revolution, like, the cyber half of it is amazing in that, do we still call something that's missing the punk aspect Cyberpunk? Or do we need a new term to start describing those?
So, Blade Runner? Which side does that fall on?
Original Blade Runner, classic Cyberpunk.
Yep.
Okay.
I haven't seen the new one.
Yeah.
I also
Yeah.
haven't seen the new one. Why the fuck would I? But that's from the perspective of effectively a cop, right?
Yes, but look at his living situation. Look at how he's treated.
Also,
and
he's
compare it to the corporate
negatively...
bosses.
Sorry?
I was just saying, compare to the corporate bosses. Nox, go.
Well, like, so much of the story, even though he is a cop, he might be part of the system, is him negatively interacting with the giant corporation. So, like, that part of it is still there, even though he might be part of the system. Like, he's cleaning up the mess, so to speak, of the giant corporation that feels like it can do whatever it wants, right?
And yeah, and also a lot of it is that he's becoming slowly more disillusioned with that system.
Mm-hmm.
Which is also a running theme in Human Revolution, isn't it? As you start realizing the horrible, like, conspiracies going on and seeing the abuses of the system by the corps.
I kind of
Yes
felt like
and
it
no.
was more, like, I felt like he was more disillusioned right after, and then kind of got more okay with what had happened to him and the company he worked with. But
He
I
was
mean,
disillusioned. He was never disillusioned with whatever is it
Seraph.
Seraph. Yeah, he was never disillusioned with Seraph Industries. He was mad at his girlfriend and then mad at the Illuminati. Like
enough.
that was it.
but the big
Like,
corporation still kind of got a pass for him in most of the story.
partly
And-
because they're controlled by the Illuminati.
Well, I also think that like post 1 second. Positioning the Illuminati as the ultimate bad guys almost undermines the punk aspect, because it's like, the problem isn't capitalism, the problem is this secret cabal of people ruling the world.
Well, no, it's a secret cabal of the ultra rich who are in control of the major corporations.
Okay, fair enough. I stand corrected.
Yeah, like I think in the opening scene of what's the new Deus Ex called?
Mankind Divided.
Mankind Divided.
So in the opening scene of Mankind Divided, you have your typical corporate CEO type guy on a phone call with what's obviously other or in a meeting with a bunch of other people who are obviously like heads of or companies and whatnot. Like it is the Illuminati is ran or is kind of like the board of directors for all of those companies. Like they're picking and choosing what gets done, but they are still those like CEO devil type characters.
What's the name of the conference, the real life one, which is like the top 20 business owners meeting up? I can't remember
Is
what
that
that's
the
called.
Brandenburg group?
Bilderberg, isn't it?
Bilderberg.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's the group, but there's also like I can't remember if it's annual or twice, like every 2 years, meetup of just like the top biggest 20 corporations kind of thing. And like that's what that always felt like to me. It has a
I
name,
mean,
but
there's
I
the-
can't remember it right now.
There's the G20, that's company. That's countries.
That's
not company.
countries, yeah. That's different.
And I hope it's called the C20. That would be a great name.
I don't think it is.
It's probably not, but I can dream. Also,
But like that's the Mankind Divided like start is pretty much supposed to be one of those, right? Like it's just the big corporate interest owners meeting and talking about stuff.
It's them saying, all right, how do we want to direct this? Like, do we want, who's going to be the patsy here?
Mhm.
What can we get the media to say to kind of shift blame onto something else? And like, then you get the like people who want to, I don't really, I haven't played enough of Mankind Evolution or whatever it's called
Mankind Divided, yeah.
to remember much of it.
yeah, I only got halfway through Human Revolution because the boss fights kill me. They're bad.
Isn't there a version of it now without the boss fights?
Yeah,
I'm
but you have to buy it.
I'm not paying $30 for the less shitty version of your game.
Fair enough, yeah.
There is a cyberpunk solution for this.
There
There
is
is.
a cyberpunk solution for this. Which we
yes.
promise not to talk about on this.
I am not talking about it. I am simply implying.
Thought it myself, obviously.
Yeah.
Hack deep into the code.
Yeah.
Like
Reverse
Just-
engineer it, no big deal.
jack the fuck in.
All right. Actually, that's something I really find. So, in Cyberpunk, you get a lot of the like jack into the Matrix, and well, I know we said it wasn't really Cyberpunk, but you get the like when you plug into the internet in Ghost in the Shell and that kind of stuff.
I mean, Gibson has that too, of just like almost physically exploring digital space, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's the one who came up with the term avatar for your online persona.
Mm-hmm.
And cyberspace as well.
Yeah.
That
I
was
mean-
the other one.
Yeah, it was literally physically in his case, because you were getting jacked up with fucking electrodes on your forehead and shit.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that was awesome.
It's really interesting to me that that's actually something we never truly pursued, is a more physical exploration or presence on the internet. Like, people always liken Second Life to that sort of thing, and I don't really I feel like we kind of abandoned moving that direction. Maybe we'll get back to it at some point, but it's just
I
never.
I feel
quite
like we're
got
starting
there.
with VR
Yeah.
chat.
We are starting with that. Like,
I was gonna mention VR chat. Yeah, so that's like another. Suddenly, once we got to VR, someone thought maybe we should try it again, kind of thing.
I'm not sure
It'll-
that's the way forward, though.
no, it's not.
No.
There's so many ways in which it's not the way forward.
Yeah. I mean, really, what it'll come down to is because the internet is something we mostly just experience with our eyes. Until we get to that point where we're experiencing it with our other senses, we'll never get to that part where we're like, okay, now let's immerse ourselves within the web.
I don't want to smell bee.
Yeah. And like
I
VR is not there, right? Like VR is still mostly just experiencing it with your eyes, just more immersively for your eyes.
And that's it for part 1 of our talk on Cyberpunk. Tune in 2 weeks for part 2, and in the meantime, subscribe to our channel and check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Midgardia. See you next time.